Are you sick of grinding opening theory for hours and still getting clapped? Same. That's why I gave up. In fact, I climbed from 500 to 2000 in bullet, blitz, and rapid using just 3 openings. I'm going to break down the exact theory I use and play live games so you can see it in action on a variety of ratings. Today's episode is all about the only opening I use as white, which is the Vienna. And hey, if you want to show up in one of these videos as my opponent, go ahead and join the Discord in the description and we'll figure it out. But all right, let's jump into theory. The Vienna is an e4, e5 opening. So this is where it starts. If the opponent does not go e5, you cannot play this. I cannot emphasize that enough. Then we go knight c3. Take a good hard look at this position. This is our starting position for everything Vienna related. The opponent can make many moves here. They could go knight f6. They could go knight c6. They could get their dark squared bishop out. It doesn't matter. The point of this video is to show you this is a system. Regardless of what they do, we can still play this system and get out of the opening with an advantage or equal always. So let's start with the memorization point because everyone always wants to know about the Vienna Gambit, and it starts after the opponent goes knight f6. Our response is pawn f4. This is the gambit. The opponent can either take the pawn or ignore the pawn. I'm not going to go into the main theory because you won't see it until you're like 1900 or 2000 or 2100. Let's go over the opponent takes the pawn. This is a very, very bad move. If the opponent takes this pawn, you should be celebrating because now we're going to push this pawn and the knight can't go anywhere without being able to be taken by our own knight or our queen. So the knight is forced back, or they pin our pawn to our king with their queen. Let's go over that because that's a little trickier and people struggle with this a little bit more. We then respond with the exact same move. We break the pin. The knight has all of the same problems and it has to go back anyways. Now, a common theme in this, we don't want to let the queen check us on h4, so we get our knight out to f3. If the opponent ever goes pawn d6, which I guarantee you they will, and you will win games this way, we now go knight d5. We attack the queen. Queen can't go anywhere. That stops us from taking with check. So they often slide up and uh-oh, you're forked. See ya, and you win the game. Can't tell you how many games I've won that way. They don't have to do that, obviously. So let's say instead the opponent goes knight c6. Well, we just continue our own development. We go pawn d4. We're going to win this f pawn back. We're going to get a big attack. We could push this pawn again, potentially. We're going to get our dark squared bishop out. We could castle long afterwards. And this is really as far as I'm going to show with the Vienna Gambit. A lot of it's trial and error. You're probably not going to get exact lines when you're playing opponents because people don't know this theory. If they go into the Gambit, they're not going to play perfectly, and you're going to be able to punish them with just a better position. And it's worth just learning how to play it. All right, let's go back. And last Gambit line, instead of them bringing the queen out, let's say they just moved back with their knight back to g8. We do the same move, knight f3, we stop the check, and the opponent has a bunch of moves here, but it's really the same thing. If they say bishop c5, that's a pretty bad move. They probably won't do that. Say they get their knight out instead. We're always trying to push pawn d4. And whenever they go to pawn c6, we always stop that with queen e2. If they take, doesn't matter. They're pinned again, and we're going to win that pawn back and have a giant advantage with our initiative and just having more pieces out. And this is how you get better at chess. You learn how to play these positions with an advantage and you convert them. You don't memorize the 7 different tactical lines in the Vienna. So that's going to be the end of the Gambit. Let's move into the copycat variation. This is another memorization standpoint, and if you get the copycat variation, you should win 99% of the time. So e4, e5 is exactly like it sounds. They're going to copy our same structure. Then we get our light squared bishop out to c4. That is where the bishop belongs in the Vienna. And they're going to do the same thing with their dark squared bishop, which is a big mistake. The eval says even, but trust me, this is not even. We then go queen g4. We're attacking the g-pawn, and the opponent can either push their g-pawn to stop it, but more often than not, they will see the opportunity to quote-unquote checkmate us. Spoiler, it's not a checkmate, and they'll go queen f6. This is a big mistake because now we have knight d5, and your opponent will be licking their chops at this point, getting super excited. They'll take the pawn on f2, we'll slide the king over, and we're completely safe. Something to keep in mind in this position, if they ever move the d-pawn like this, be careful of your queen getting sniped by the light squared bishop, and instead just take the g-pawn. Don't be too excited to take the rook. We don't want the queen to stay on the square. That is something to remember. We want to get this queen out of here. So let's actually back up and say they didn't move that. And just for demonstration purposes, they go pawn g6. We're trying to force this queen away. We go knight h3. This is a very common move in the copycat. The queen can't go anywhere that can't be taken by one of our knights or a queen or a pawn or a rook. So they're forced to go to d4, and we then lock the queen in jail. And again, they could push the pawn and try to snipe us, which we just move. They could try to get their knight out for some reason. But if they make a bad move, like getting their knight out, the queen's trapped. And that's the whole reason of getting the queen here, because a lot of opponents won't realize how much danger they're in. And the queen actually has no squares. The knight can take them at f2. And yeah, this is just a completely winning position. And that's the copycat for you. Let's back up to the other line of the copycat. So instead of them getting the queen out, let's say they just played defensively. They went pawn g6. We're then going to slide our queen right back to f3. And yeah, we're threatening the checkmate on f7. The opponent might try to stop this with knight f6. This is a bad move. And we're going to go knight e2 because we don't want the knight going here and forcing our queen away. The opponent will probably move their d-pawn. And then again, we don't want the light squared bishop to force our queen away. So we're going to move our h-pawn. And here, they're probably going to go into castle. We go d-pawn up. And you can probably see what I'm getting at. We're trying to attack this f-knight. They could move their king up. This is a decent move and probably their best move to save it. But we have a much better position. We're attacking the knight. And a lot of times, they won't defend this properly. Let's say they move the rook over for some reason. Now the game's essentially over because they've lost the move. They didn't move the king right away to defend. And we can get our knight out. We're triple attacking the knight. The queen is about to get sniped. And we're going to win the game. So that's the copycat. That's the gambit. Hopefully that's a decent intro to those two memorization lines. Let's get into the main system, which is what you're going to see 80-90% of the time, and really what you need to learn how to play. e4, e5, we get our knight out, and let's just say our opponent gets both of their knights out. So this is a very boring, common opening, but you need to know how to play this, and this is the system. I recommend just going pawn d3, not messing with any funny business. And again, the opponent can make a bunch of moves here, but something common you'll see is either bishop e4 or bishop c5. Then let's just get our knight out again. And we're just going to develop normally. That's really the whole point. We castle, they push their d-pawn, they're trying to pin us. I don't like to allow the pin, so I always go pawn h3. We're probably going to offer a trade, which I will take. They take back. And yeah, we just continue developing, and that's the system. You get all your pieces out, and this is how you learn how to play chess. You learn how to play these types of positions, you review your games, and you get these structures that aren't super complex. You have a lot of open lines. Your knights can reroute. You can start a pawn push on this side of the board. Obviously, I'm not going to go over all of this because that's not opening theory. So yeah, that is really the entire Vienna. I didn't go over the mainline gambit because you literally won't see it unless you're in the 2000s or high 1900s. I've only seen it a handful of times below 1800. But anyways, I have some viewers who are going to play me, and I'm going to demonstrate this opening. So let's get into our first game. Okay, we got a game against Snowy Utrainus. I don't know if I'm saying that right. He's ranked 600, and we're just going to play the Vienna. So e4. e5, and that's all our opponent knows to play. Now they're on their own. Let's go knight c3 and begin our setup. And this is the main setup. Depending on what they do, they go knight c6. We might get a copycat here. Let's go bishop c4. And this is one of the most common openings you'll get to this. You'll usually run into knight c6, I'd say like 60% of the time when you play this opening. And if they actually go bishop c5, that is the copycat, but they don't. They get both their knights out, which you get a game that's just a normal Vienna setup. Let's go over how to play this opening. I like to go pawn d3, and when they move the d-pawn, I try not to let them pin us. I usually go pawn h3. They can go after our bishop and take it. Whoops, and take it, but we would just back up so we can take with the rook. And they do just that. They push their d-pawn, and again, I don't want to allow this pin. And they go knight d4, which is an interesting move. I'm going to offer a trade with knight e2. They take, we're going to take back with the queen and get developed. And if they don't take, I think this is a good idea to trade. Yeah, let's trade this knight because it doubles their pawns, and we can actually offer another trade going knight d5 ourselves, and if they take, we take back with the bishop, would be attacking the rook, and this pawn would be very isolated. Now let's pin the knight with our bishop so they can't take with the knight. And if they push the pawn, that's a mistake because we could first take the knight. Okay, that's a good move by our opponent. I am going to trade the bishop here. I'm just playing super simple. I'm not going for any advanced tactics. And the reason for that is I just want to demonstrate how you can win with this opening. So let's go queen f3. We're double attacking the knight. I am just going to trade it because that would force their pawns to be doubled, which is a win for us. So let's do it. Let's take the knight. And we're clearly out of the opening at this point, but I want to demonstrate that this opening gives you good positions and it's super easy to play. You don't need to be a grandmaster to play the Vienna. And they have an open file on g8, so I don't really want to castle short and allow them to attack us. So let's castle long. We have two sets of double pawns. We have a good scope on this f pawn. We'll probably win it at some point. And now we just need to come up with a plan to convert. So sort of what I'm thinking is queen h5, maybe queen f5, opens up our scope for the queen, centralizes the queen, and we have an eye on a lot of pawns. I'm leaning more towards queen h5 because we could then have the scope on the f pawn. And I want to push our own f pawn to f4 and eventually to f5 to completely isolate these pawns. They go rook g8. Let's go pawn g4. That was a good move by them. And now I'm looking at queen f5. In this case, I wish we didn't have an f pawn so I could bring a rook there, but it is what it is. And this opening hasn't been anything crazy, right? Like we just got our pieces out. We doubled two of their pawns. And that's how you beat players at this level. Let's check them. And let's push our f pawn. We can't be forced out by any pieces except their bishop. And if they decide to attack us with the bishop, we always could go to the right, or we could honestly shift to the left as well. I don't know which is better. But here we're just storming down the board. And I don't see how they stop it. They can't offer a queen trade there. And I'm just going to, let's go to the left side. Completely lock down the board. We could go pawn f5 after this, but I honestly don't even think that's necessary. Bishop d5 looks pretty good because if they don't go bishop b7 right away to stop it, I'm pretty sure queen c6 is forced checkmate. Wow, so, okay, they sack a pawn. Let's just take the pawn. I don't want to take with the g pawn because that opens up the rook. I'd rather open up the queen because the queen can be forced away. Let's go bishop e5. Again, they have to address it. If they don't go bishop b7, then the game should just end on the spot. And our opponent is only ranked 600, so it's very possible they don't see it. Anyone below 1,000, if you just keep making threats to the king, and these aren't advanced tactics that I'm showing, they're pretty simple tactics. And our opponent does miss it, so that should be the game. We go queen c6. Even if they take with check, we just slide our king over, and I don't see any squares for the queen to defend that. If they move the bishop to here, we still have checkmate on h8. So let's go queen c6, and that should essentially be the game. Unless I'm missing something, but I don't think there's any moves to save this because we have two checkmate threats. One looks unstoppable, and even if they move the bishop, anywhere they move the bishop, Queen a8 is still checkmate, so that should be the game. I think our opponent's realizing it. They're down to a minute. And yeah, you know, I love the Vienna because it's so simple and it works very well until you run into opponents playing the main line every single game, which I promise you won't run into unless you're in the 2000s. So it's worth knowing. It's a great way to get familiar with a lot of different pawn structures and tactics, attacking chess and defending chess, mostly attacking because the Vienna is more aggressive in my opinion than most openings. Our opponent sacks the queen and that will be checkmate. And that's the game. Good game to our opponent. And shout out them. Join the Discord if you want to be an opponent. Let's quickly review this game. I'm sure I didn't even play perfectly. But so we played 91%, which is pretty good. But we didn't do anything crazy. We developed. We got our bishop out. They played very normally. You'll run into this a lot. We pushed our pawn. Didn't allow them to pin our bishop. Got our knight out. Traded the knight to double their pawns. Pinned their knight. We took their dark squared bishop to get the bishop pair. Got our queen out. Doubled their pawns again, which isn't even the best move, but it gives us a winning position. We get our queen out. We push on the right side of the board. They give us a pawn. We make a checkmate threat, and the game is over. And that was that. So nothing crazy. If you're ranked 600 or 1,000 or 1,500, whatever, you can do this. Nothing I did was too crazy. Anyways, we have 2 more opponents to get. Let's get our next game. This will be against Yafank. Shout out to him. Let's play the Vienna. The only thing I've instructed to our opponents is to start the game e4, e5. After that, they can do whatever they want. So the Vienna, knight c3. Just as we went over in the theory. And now this is our base position. Let's see what our opponent does. Okay, they go knight c6. We have potential to get a copycat. So let's go light squared bishop c4. And if they move their bishop here, that's a mistake. Okay, we got a very basic opening, so this will demonstrate more so the system than any of the gambit lines or the copycat. So let's just develop normally, go pawn d3. Something I'm keeping in mind, I don't ever want to let them pin me, so if I go knight f3, so they go knight d4, which is an interesting move. I don't exactly know what that does. It looks pretty aggressive. Let's just continue developing, and I'm actually going to go knight e2 and try to force it off. The reason I went knight e2 versus knight f3 is because knight f3 allows the light squared bishop pin, which looks like it could get kind of nasty, and I don't really want to allow that sort of play. So we're going to trade off this knight if they let us, which it looks like they do. But before trading the knight, I'm actually going to pin the knight they just put on f6. And again, we're out of the opening. This is just me playing using the Vienna setup. All right, at this point, we could trade the knight, which doesn't look bad, but I'm still not going to do it yet. Let's just castle and continue playing safe. We got a very normal opening. They attack our bishop. Let's back up. They attack again. We back up again. And now I am going to trade the knight if they let us. They make a good play and they don't let us trade the knight. But I'm going to stick our knight onto d5, offer a trade, see what happens next. If they take, I'm going to take back with the bishop. I could take back with the pawn, but I do want to keep this diagonal open if possible. And now they do go for the pin. The whole reason we put our knight on e2 was so we could push that pawn. And let's get rid of their dark squared bishop. You may have heard before, it's an advantage to have the bishop pair. And I'm going to push pawn c3 because I don't want to allow the knight to either of these squares. And we have a solid position here. Now the game plan, to me, they castled long. When they castle long versus you castling short, what that tells me is this is going to be a very dynamic game. And right away, I'm thinking, let's attack. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to push b4 and basically go all in, trying to attack their king. They move their bishop to g6. I don't see what that does. Let's continue our attack and just fire all of our pawns on the left side of the board and try to get to their king as fast as possible. Next moves that I'm thinking is pawn a5 and then pawn b5. The reason I want to go a5 first is because if we go b5 first, that allows knight a5. But if we go a5 first, the rook would then be covering that square. They push to d5. That's a solid move for sure. Let's... so we could take either direction. Let's just take on and see what our opponent wants to do. And they take back with the knight. I'm looking at counterplay with the knight on e3, so I'm not going to let that happen. Let's go dark squared bishop f2. And we still have a good position. We're going to continue pushing these pawns. And I like the idea of queen b3, just to get our queen in on the attack, also double attacking the knight on d5. But our plan is to just keep firing these pawns. They are quite a few moves away from making it work. I think their best move probably is pawn f5. It's very aggressive. And let's trade that knight off. And we could actually go rook e1. I'm going to go queen e2 to keep an eye on this pawn. And if needed, bring our f rook over to defend the pawn. And then finally, we will probably be able to continue our plan of pushing the pawns. Something else we could do is go rook e1 and then push pawn b5. And then we would win the e pawn because they have two defenders with the knight and the queen. That's an interesting move. I don't think it's a bad move by any means, but we can just defend again with rook d1. So I'm not too concerned about that move. And the knight was then the only defender of the e pawn, so I am just going to grab that pawn with our queen. We got a solid position. We're winning, we're up a center pawn, and our opponent hung another pawn, which I will take. Yeah, let's grab that pawn. And they still can't even take this pawn because they would have to take with the bishop, and we would take back with the rook or the bishop, and they would lose their queen. All right, let's take the h-pawn. It is getting a little scary how our queen side, our king side is completely open, but it's nothing we can't handle. And then I want to stick the bishop to f6. Let's do that. Rook e1 is now looking pretty good. An open file, so let's take it. I'm playing a little fast. I'm down to a minute 38. I don't want these games to go for too long. And we're up 2 pawns. I see no reason not to try and trade everything on the board. So let's do just that. Let's not allow our d pawn to be taken. So let's move it up. And now we can start trading. This is completely winning. And really just a matter of converting. How do you convert when you're up material? Well, the answer to that is you trade down. So they're attacking our bishop. Again, that is not a bad move at all. I'm going to go back to h4. I don't want to go here because they could push the pawn. And let's go bishop g3, line up our queen for an attack. And next move, I am going to trade a rook. Our opponent has to be very careful. They can't grab this pawn because we then have a rook c1, which attacks the c pawn again, and that will just be checkmate. I don't see any tactics off the bat with taking the rook. Unfortunately, they can take it back with the queen, and they don't have to take with the pawn. If they had to take with the pawn, that would open up an attack on their f rook, and we would be looking very, very solid. So let's see what our opponent does. If they don't do anything, and if it was our move here, I would just trade the rook. Well, let's see. They're down to a minute now. All right, and I'm going to go on b5 to attack the rook. And there's something I'm noticing Let's go queen h6 because our bishop still looks at the rook. And they do have to go back. Now let's take the 7th rank. We're threatening rook c7, which would win the queen. That's usually a good move if you can win the queen. Let's take that pawn. Let's check them, and that is checkmate. And that was a good game, great game to Yefenk. But if we review that game, you'll notice I didn't do anything crazy. So we got out of the opening, got our Vienna set up. They pushed the pawn, which is something you'll see, but this is completely even at this point, and that's what you want. You want to get out of the opening. We pinned the knight, which actually wasn't the best move. But then we just really played normally. They thought the pawn push wasn't the best, but we're still winning here. We're up 2 at this point. We won some pawns. Took the knight. Positioned our bishops a little better, made some threats, and then we won with a checkmate blunder. So what does that tell you? You need to learn the tactics. I didn't memorize anything for that opening. I just got the setup I wanted, and then I played with it because I'm comfortable with it. And it's very easy to play, honestly. Let's get our next game. All right, and we got our final opponent against Cool Dog, who's ranked 1683. I've played them before. They're honestly much higher rated than that. We go e4, we go e5, and we got a Vienna Gambit. So here, the move is pawn f4. They can either accept or deny it. They choose to deny it by defending with the pawn. This is actually an inferior way to play the Vienna Gambit as black. What we do is we attack the pawn, and when they go after our knight, we just go pawn h3, and we take back with the queen. They get their knight out, and we're going to pin the knight. And I will explain the reasoning behind this. So right now you'll see they're pinned, and when they castle, we're going to take the knight, then take the pawn. And if you can imagine that, when we take the knight, they're going to have double pawns here. And when we take the e pawn, they're going to have, at the very end, 2 double isolated pawns. Now let's go pawn d3. They're probably going to castle here, but we'll see what they do. They don't. They defend with the queen. And let's just castle ourselves. They try to kick us out. We're going to back up. And this is a fine position. So they go after us with their knight. Again, I think is fine. We're going to have to move the queen here. Question is, where do we move the queen? Maybe a better move would have been bishop c4, just to keep the bishop pair. But this should also be fine. I think let's just back up the queen 1. And if they take our bishop, we will have an open file for our rook. So they do, they take our bishop, we take back, and now we do have that open file, which is pretty good for us overall. Now the question is, how do we attack? So we could push the pawn, which doesn't look bad. First things first, let's move our king to h1 in case we ever want to go rook g1. They might go knight h5, which I think is fine. We can always kick it out with g4. And they look like they want to attack our knight. I don't think it's that scary. And now let's just go all in with pawn g4. I think we have the tools to attack them. And even if they push e4, I don't think it's a big deal. Cool. So now we can take back with the bishop. We basically finish our development. And let's now go rook g1 with the clear idea that we want to open up the g file, push our pawn forward, and really just try to end the game. Here we go knight e2. I don't want to trade on d5, and the only other square is a4, which it's a one move threat. Like, we do have the potential to fork them there, but it's really just not worth it. Okay. Go knight g3. And here we should be getting in. I think even we could move our king up here. Now they have no threats on the h3 square. Okay, and they go pawn g6. So how do we finish off this attack? First thoughts, we could go pawn h4. That does let them take the g pawn, but I don't think we care too much about that. Let's do it. Let's try to kick the knight out. And then that should give us the g pawn or the h pawn. So they're going to have to move their knight probably to e6. I don't think they sack it here. Sacking it looks pretty crazy. They would kind of get in, but I don't see them finishing any sort of attack. I think honestly that would end up helping us because we would now have the open g file. Okay, they do. They take the g pawn. So here we obviously take the knight. And let's go bishop e3. They attack us. Move over. And when you're winning, what you want to do is just trade down. We don't want to let any checks happen on the h file, so that's why I went rook h1. And that's a good move. I think here we can run a queen trade. Unpin our knight. Reason being, we can't take the rook because they would take back with the pawn, and then our knight would still be pinned and we would end up losing our knight. So they're making some really solid threats, at the very least. Okay, they move their queen back. Good move. Let's get our knight out of danger. And they do have a check, but I don't think it's that big of a deal, because we can just go knight right back. All right, let's move over again. They check us, and now I am going to move the king over. I would have hoped that they didn't go for that, but it's unavoidable at this point. Take them. And let's bring our rook over and try to trade some rooks. Now our knight's getting in. They're pinned, so they can't take our queen. And if they go to a square where we can fork them, that would be pretty cool. We're also attacking their... So let's take their rook here. Move over. And here we have a nice discovery to win the game. We take their queen. All right, so let's review this game. e4, e5, we do our setup, and they go for the Vienna gambit line. They choose to deny the gambit by defending their pawn with a pawn. And here we just ignore that completely. We develop our knight. They pin our knight. And just to demonstrate, if they had backed up after we went h6, we would then go pawn g4. And if they back up again, we push our f pawn, and eventually we would get to that bishop. So that is the reasoning why they have to take after they go bishop g4. So they take, we take back with the queen. We pin the knight. The whole idea is to eventually double their pawns. They get their bishop out, which is a great move. We castle. And I actually played this a little incorrectly. I should have just taken the knight straight away. Instead, I back up. They get the bishop pair. We're still up here, but we could have had a bigger advantage at this point. And as you can see, I didn't play perfectly by any means, but still here we have an advantage. We're getting all of our pieces out. We're beginning an attack. They sack their queen for the knight just to get some initiative. And the computer's giving some pretty crazy moves here. But yeah, we get all our pieces out. We have a massive attack at the end. They hung the rook. We defend. We get over. All our pieces are pretty harmonized. And this tactic with the discovery on the queen is the killer of this game. So we sack our rook on g4 for the pawn. That wins us the queen. And we have 3 pieces to their 1 bishop, same amount of pawns. This is a very winning endgame. We could even sack our queen for the bishop at this point. And yeah, that's an introduction to the Vienna. I can't wait to show you all the other 2 openings I know that got me to 2000. But until then, I will see you next time.